Good morning, beloved Oregon Synod. I don't know what time you will receive this, but it's morning here and I'm just back from my walk. Daily walks through my neighborhood have become a sacred action on holy ground for me in this pandemic. It is where I get to talk to my neighbors. I discovered this week 3 were furloughed. It is when I check in on the progress of the little girls across the street learning to ride their two-wheeler bikes. They're getting it. Learning is happening in pandemic. It is space and time and movement where when I get to process and integrate all that I am hearing and sharing and learning with you all on countless Zoom call meetings. And it is where my neighbors' gardens greet me with revelry and lavish hope. Life is happening anyway, Melissa, all the buds and blooms preach. So a shout out to all of you gardeners out there. You are word cultivators, every one of you. Well, I live in what's called East Portland, just past 82nd Street in the northeast quadrant of Portland. And this last Thursday, as I often do, I went for a walk. And I rounded the bend onto what is Fremont Ave, and it's my normal route, but I was startled by the line of people that came into sight. You see, on 82nd Ave in Fremont, there is a food pantry, Wellspring. And these days, well, even really before the pandemic, there was often a line of people waiting for clothing and food. But today, or that day, on that Thursday, I was turning the corner on about 87th. And that means that the line stretched at least 4.5 blocks long. People were doing their best to social distance. Many had masks on. Many were of our vulnerable age. But you could tell it was hard with so little space. Lots of negotiating. And then as I walked across the street from them, I noticed that as I got closer to 82nd, I could hear music. I craned my ear as I approached. Familiar rhythms and reggaeton? And I realized that the front of the line as folks reached the food, which looked a little like an outdoor market with crates of produce, cans, and boxes, it became a kind of party. The volunteers and staff received folks, supported them to get what they needed, laughing and even dancing as they worked alongside one another, distancing as best they could. This was a mutual operation in dignity. One man was singing through his mask. I was moved and stopped in my tracks by that party and their resistant joy. I mean, the world around them had been organized so that these folks are acutely vulnerable. And in the midst of pandemic, like lambs lined up for the slaughter. And yet here, we had empty tomb joy, tasting and living and dancing into that deepest eternal truth of belonging and worthiness and feast. I was standing there beholding and witnessing all the meals Jesus shares throughout his ministry and beyond, always with the marginalized and the unsavory. All the times there were seemingly not enough, and then leftovers anyway. How under the weight of empire and in the face of the cross, like a lamb in line for slaughter, Jesus shared a meal. And in the wake of the cross, he came among beloveds alongside them, and in bread, he broke open truth. In my neighborhood, I came upon a witness of the heavenly banquet. I noticed that as I crossed 82nd into the city, I was now dancing too. But I don't recall any lines at Jesus' party. The groove of the party on 82nd and Fremont has been sticking with me the last week like honey. particularly the utter delight in the midst of human relationship and, well, food. A resistant savoring and celebrating of life that should not be, that the world did not organize and has, in fact, pressed in, but springs up anyway. And the party has invited for me a spiritual practice of savoring of life and, yes, food in the midst of this pandemic. I have this book of poetry called The Hungry Ear. It's poems about food and drink, and I've been reading it in the mornings after my walk as I start my day. It's inviting me into the human experience of hunger, savoring, delight, and just our common basic need for food to live. I have found myself licking the butter off my toast slowly and sipping my tea like nectar these days. These moments connect me to other bellies and hungry tongues, groaning hearts and awake feet that know the dance of truth. Like all good news, the party on 82nd and Fremont indicts my complacency while inviting a resistant joy to join the dance. And I'm paying attention to where that swell of gratitude and delight, as well as my grief and anger over the line, leads me. So I'll share with you one of the poems that makes me salivate, and I'll ask you to notice today, for what do you hunger? And who else hungers with you? What life do you savor today? And with whom will you savor it? This poem is called Blackberry Eating by Galway Kinnell. I love to go out in late September among the fat, overripe, icy blackberries to eat blackberries for breakfast. The stalks very prickly, a penalty they earn for knowing the black art of blackberry making. And as I stand among them, lifting the stalks to my mouth, the ripest berries fall almost unbidden to my tongue, as words sometimes do. Certain peculiar words like strengths or squinched or brahm, many lettered one-syllable lumps, which I squeeze, squinch open, and splurge well in the silent, startled, icy black language of blackberry eating in late September. Beloveds, for what do you hunger today? And who else hungers with you? What life do you savor today? And with whom will you savor it? Blessings to you.